Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. So sorry we were just a couple of minutes late there. I have just said to my fellow speakers, for those of you who don't know me, I foster for an animal rescue, and I currently have a rabbit trying to bite my slippers. So I'm going to power through and be professional, but I'm doing my best. So thank you everyone for joining us. For those of you who don't know, Truman Change, we're a small business. We're based in the Northwest, but we do work around the country. And we specialise in change and transformation in local government. And I'm the managing director. And one of my current sort of passions and curiosities really is the impact of the pandemic on change and transformation in the public sector. So I lost my dad at the start of the pandemic to COVID, and I guess it was part of my kind of therapy initially of just sort of trying to see what the positive impacts of COVID were as opposed to the very tragic and difficult impacts. And one of the things that we started to see as a consultancy was that public sector, really large, complex public sector organisations that in the past, sometimes it was quite slow to make change happen, suddenly went to a place where they were making change happen extremely quickly. So over the last 18 months, I've been doing quite a lot of research around this and speaking to lots of different people, running lots of conversations like this, but also interviewing people to understand what were those magic ingredients that enabled us to do change in a quicker, but also a much more human focused way than perhaps how we've done it before. And one of the key ingredients we found as part of those conversations was clarity. And probably the simplest way to summarize that is that we started from a place of, right, everybody needs to work from home by this date, instead of starting from a place of we want things to be more agile and flexible. So the clarity and the direction was super, super strong, albeit not at a national level, but at a local level and an organizational level. People got very specific about what they were going to do. And I think there's a really interesting lesson there for how we go about driving change in the future. So we've decided to keep running these sessions really just because it's interesting to talk about, and it's interesting to hear from different perspectives and from different people in different organisations about what themes they saw and whether or not they're going to change the way that they do change going forward. So we've got a brilliant panel for you today. And one of the things we do, just so you know, is we do record the sessions, but we only record the visuals of the speaker. So you can leave your camera off or you can put it on. It doesn't matter at all. You won't end up on YouTube if you've left your camera on, don't worry. And it is just a very informal conversation. So please do feel free to take part, put some questions in the chat or your reflections in the chat. We've not got a script, we've not got a presentation. It is really just a conversation between people in the sector about what they've learned during the pandemic and how they might go about doing change differently going forward. So I'm really excited to introduce you to our panel. So we have today with us Teresa Itabo, who is an experienced transformation and change professional. She's got a brilliant track record of delivering major service improvements in local government and housing associations. She spent the last 20 years as a transformation and change leader, working directly with CEOs and senior leadership teams in local authorities, automating and streamlining business processes through the use of technology and implementing effective target operating models. And Teresa was working during the pandemic, specifically in a commercial service that was trading with schools. So she's got interesting perspective to share with us there. We also have Ian Thomas. So Ian Thomas is the CEO of the Royal Borough of Kingston upon Thames, and he was appointed in that role in December 2018, and the council has been on a significant journey of transformation. So a very successful past year for the council includes an impressive response to COVID, and the authority was shortlisted for 3 MJ Awards, including Council of the Year, with commendations in 2 further categories, and was the winner of Senior Leadership Team of the Year 2021. So we'd love to hear about your perspective of how you managed to use clarity around your leadership team and how you managed to empower your leadership team to do so well during such a difficult time. And Hannah Hannah is a Senior Comms and Marketing Officer at Hyndburn Borough Council. Now, we've worked with Hyndburn. They're very local. They're like next door to me. I'm in Blackburn. And they set up a really amazing, as many local authorities did, a sort of community hub response to the pandemic. And Hannah's experience in that was that she was the comms and marketing officer, and she's got lots of experience of comms and marketing in both the public and private sector. She specialises in reputation management and crisis communication, which, as we all know, became very invaluable when the pandemic hit. Hyndburn was one of the worst affected areas in the Northwest, and Hannah led the comms for the local authority at a time when effective communication was particularly crucial. And again, going back to what I said earlier, at a time when nationally it was not always that clear. So that was a really challenging role. And so Hannah's going to share with us today her thoughts around how comms is so crucial when it comes to clarity. So, Ian, I'm going to come to you first. So with that sort of general introduction, I'd just love to hear your general reflections around clarity and change and comms and what happened. What do you think will change as a result of the pandemic in terms of leadership?
Thanks, Lucy. Firstly, I want to give kudos to you, Lucy, because whenever I've seen you in any conference, you're the person always around really with lots of passion and energy around change and transformation. I've always enjoyed our kind of fireside chats about it. So, you know, congratulations to you and your business and for focusing on this really important area and for bringing us together today. So that's the first thing I'd like to say.
Thank you.
The second thing is that it was really interesting because the Professor Grint, among others, talk about different types of issues that we need to contemplate as senior leaders, the critical, tame and wicked issues. And the tame ones are the ones where we've seen the problem before, we know how to resolve it, so we deal with it. So that's probably a mechanical problem. We know the route to resolve the issue, we resolve the issue. The wicked ones are many of the issues we face today with regards to reducing resources and increased demand for our most critical services at a time when there are workforce challenges nationally. And when people are really tired, you know, so how do you square that circle? So that's the sort of wicked issue that we face. But this issue is a critical one where it did require command and control and for people to take charge. And that's unusual for Kingston because we promote a distributed leadership model. And, you know, you talked about an award, and I said to people when we received that I'm not the first person to say it clearly, but, you know, it's that thing about standing on the shoulders of giants. If I can see further, it was Newton, wasn't it? Isaac Newton said, if I can see further, it's because I'm stood on the shoulders of giants. So that award was not about the SLT per se, but it was about how we worked together in Kingston using that distributed leadership model. But when the pandemic hit, we had to get into critical mode, whilst at the same time regaining that sense of democratic accountability and control, and that's really, really difficult. So as councils, we deliver for our elected members, they set the policy, and through that combination we improve services for residents, and we exist to ensure that residents have a high quality of life. In this situation, the power kind of had to change because of our civic responsibilities as chief executives, directors of public health, etc., with statutory responsibilities. So that was interesting, but because of our way of working, which is about clear and transparent communications, worked well for Kingston because we were very clear with our elected members and transparent in terms of what was happening. I think it was the same with partners, our comms, and we're going to have a comms specialist speak later on. I think both internally and externally were improved. And what the pandemic showed, and I'm going to stop because there are people to hear from, was the resolve and the resilience within communities to work together in a very quick space of time. People talk about, you know, traveling 5 years, between 5 and 10 years in the matter of months, and that is absolutely true. The way that we interact now using these methods, these modes, the way we deliver services, more services online, and successfully so. There's always going to be a conversation about online versus person to person, face to face, the way we've navigated all of the challenges with regards to democracy and holding meetings, and how we incrementally got the balance right between the political steer and the statutory officer responsibilities, something that we can and should learn from going forward. On that going forward, I think that there's lots to be optimistic about, although we have serious challenges ahead with regards to, and I alluded to this, demand for social care, the burgeoning inequalities across our communities that are marginalizing some communities in a way we've not seen before. And of course, as ever, the money, and it is tight. Money is too tight to mention the song there, but it is absolutely tight. And we've always worked hard to be efficient and effective in local government. We're going to have to do so even more now, and new ways of working, different partnerships, collaboration, digital by design, etc., etc. Could go on all day, but I'll just pause there because there's some very, very reflections from me.
Thank you very much, Ian. So, Teresa, what are your reflections on what needs to change about how we do change?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this, Lucy. Really appreciate it. And good morning, everyone. From my perspective, I was in the middle of a really sort of huge transformation and change when the pandemic hit. So I had a mandate to deliver new IT systems and change processes and structures, because this was a trading company that was set up, which was a spin-off from the local authority. So we were motoring on, everything was great, and we'd already decided, okay, so we are going to procure our own systems, we're going to be independent of the local authority, we're going to deliver this new way of working, improve customer service, quality of the service we delivered. And in the middle of it, the pandemic hit, and the challenges for me, or the challenge for myself and my team, was actually delivering this remotely, going live remotely with systems that we haven't tested, with systems that we were in the middle of working through, and communicating to two different service areas, because there were two different services that made up the trading company, and they were at different stages of learning, and they were completely different services. So it's actually how to, the challenge for us was how to actually ensure that we delivered these services effectively, or the systems went live effectively remotely, because we couldn't then do the face-to-face hands-on training that had already been planned in the program. So I think for us, it was a sort of quick thinking on our feet. How do we change stuff? How do we change what we planned? How do we train staff remotely and go live with these systems and still make it happen and still stick to the time scale? Or will it be a situation where the time scale will be so affected that we can't actually deliver on the program? And what impact would this be on resources, on staff morale, on all of those things that we'd sort of planned in the traditional way of planning a transformation and change? So for me, I think what transpired was and I don't think we sing enough praises of staff that are not usually visible in the normal world. So in a normal change and transformation, you get people that are quite vocal about what needs to change, and they get it, they get the clarity of what you're delivering. And then there are those staff that you barely say anything. And these are the people that came to the forefront during the pandemic. They were the ones that came up with the ideas. They were the ones that actually you're like, oh, I like your idea. They were bringing changes to the table that we didn't plan before. So we had to rejig the whole processes that we had before to see if we can deliver these services remotely. We did go through a period of actually delaying the go live, because we had to delay the go live, because we did have to take into account staff that aren't used to remote training, whether we can still carry on and deliver the services to the standard that we wanted to deliver it to when we went live. So for me, the change during the pandemic was we didn't have the time to sit down and think about, oh, how do we do this? We had to literally just go in and do something because we had to deliver the services. I think that if we weren't in that situation with the trading companies, we were with the local authority, I think it probably would be handled differently. But I think that because we were almost sort of straddling the commercial, public sector, private sector thing, we just really had to push in because we had to deliver. And I think that on the other side of it, because we also had a school service within the change program, and I think what came out of it that was really admirable from my perspective was staff actually going out and we put together a plan to deliver free school meals, food parcels to families that are vulnerable and whose children are entitled to free school meals. So all of that was done. It was planned with the council, in conjunction with the council, and we did all of that. So it was a case of doing stuff with the council and then doing stuff independently as a trading company and delivering the change. I think going forward, we haven't actually, I don't think there is, in terms of change and transformation, from my perspective anyway, that there is a sort of plan that this is how we're going to do it post-pandemic. I think we're still learning, as you said, Lucy, earlier, we're still learning what to do and what types of, how do we approach each change because they're different, and how do we communicate? Communication, I mean, my experience with the last change I did, a lot of communication with the trade union that hadn't happened to that level with other transformation changes that I'd had. So it depends on the service, on where you are, what you're delivering. But I think it's still a conversation that is emerging for now.
Sorry. On that note, Hannah, I had to mute because I had a cat meowing at the door. It is animal chaos at my house, I'm afraid. Hannah, so do you want to tell us a little bit about the very difficult position that comms specialists were in during the pandemic, where it was really crucial to communicate with a high amount of clarity when actually we didn't always have that clarity ourselves? Do you want to talk us through how that was?
Yeah, thanks, Lucy, and thanks for having me. It's we throw back the term unprecedented times a lot, don't we? And it's kind of lost meaning, but it really, really was, and it was a huge challenge. To give a bit of background, at Hindman Council, we're a tiny local authority. We've been disproportionately affected by the pandemic, as you've said, and like other areas in the northwest, we've been under enhanced measures for more than most as well. To give a bit of perspective, when I talk about our comms team, in reality, behind closed doors, that is myself and my wonderful apprentice who's sat just over there. So that is the extent of our team to deliver what we had to do through this pandemic. It was a huge, huge challenge. We're small and mighty, and I guess what we've learned and what we can pass on through this is the struggle we've gone through to prioritise those resources. When you're being given 500 priority messages that are there to save lives, how do you as two individuals make sure that that information has impact? What resources do you use for it? And that's been a huge challenge, yeah. In terms of what will be different, and how we look at that and how we communicate that. I guess if you ask pretty much anyone, everybody knows that we're not going back to pre-pandemic times. We keep talking about the new normal, thrown around a lot. Has that kind of lost meaning? Maybe. Do we have as Teresa says, we don't really have an idea of what the future will look like. From my point of view, in my role, it's a little bit different. Teresa and Ian have spoke about the importance from a leadership and management point of view and all the challenges that they've faced with the services they've had to deliver. My role is quite different. I communicate those decisions made by the leaders. And from my point of view, the work I would like to share, before we clarify what will be different, while we're having that conversation, it'd be really great to first communicate that change is coming and take people along for that journey. I guess the question is, we've not really accepted the new normal, because we don't know what that new normal is. We don't know what that vision is. So asking those questions outwardly rather than just at a strategic level is just fantastic for getting everyone along for that journey, to get that buy-in and get that confidence from those that the change will impact. And from my point of view, that would mean as a support role, we don't then have to backtrack and explain the journey and explain that understanding. Often when people say the word clarity, it's almost like we've got the answer. From my point of view, clarity isn't always that we've got the answer. Clarity can be, we don't have the answer, but this is what we're doing to try and figure it out. Let's talk about it. Let's have that two-way conversation. Throughout the pandemic, local authorities previously were largely broadcast only organisations on social media, you know, sending out email bulletins. Now we've kind of opened those doors a bit to a two-way conversation and that engagement. And for me, seeing that continue beyond the pandemic through change and throughout the end result is what will really help internally and externally. Thanks.
Thank you, Hannah. So Ian, I'm just going to come back to you because you did talk about that in some ways there was an emergency planning takeover of command and control, but then also at the same time as that, what we saw, and I know you alluded to it too, was just a massive increase in a much more collaborative and partnership way of working with staff, with partners, with community. And I think that's really interesting that both those things happened, because often those two are seen as opposite ends of the spectrum, and actually what we did was increase both at the same time. And I just wondered what your reflections were on that.
That's a really good question. I think first I'd just like to commend Teresa for the work in implementing a new IT system, something that I've been involved in. But throughout the pandemic, even worse, you know, 70% of those change programs fail.
Yeah.
Even more so. Teresa, for you to land that was amazing. So well done on that. Then to what Hannah said about comms, and really powerful about, you know, about what clarity means, and communications. For me, it's as much about repetition and really simple messages. I say to people that, you know, when I grew up in the 70s, and betraying my age, you know, I actually believed that a Mars a day would help me work, rest and play. You know, I was told it every day, you know, where I turned, and I actually did believe that opal fruits made my mouth water, because powerful, simple messages on repeat. So I would go, you know, in terms of supporting what Hannah said, you know, keeping it simple is really important, and that will help achieve some form of clarity, and also building on the fact that she was alluding to new ways of communicating as well, particularly given that we have new digital platforms. And it's a segue into what you've asked me, because whilst there was a command and control regime in place, we were really keen to ensure that we did that in partnership, not just with elected members as officers, but with our partners, our amazing voluntary sector, our fantastic health partners, our fantastic police partners on the ground. And you're quite right, Lucy, there was and it's not just Kingston, it's up and down the country, a real tension in ensuring that we got the balance right, as I said before, with what had to be done in terms of a public health crisis, and empowering people to do the right things. And that's where we saw people come into their own, and the partnerships were strengthened across the whole borough and up and down the country. You'll see these examples. Our relationship with the business sector improved because we were given the money, not taking it. was probably one of the reasons why. But that really improved, and we formulated new partnerships, new ways of working, thrived really quickly. And if we're going to hold on to anything, it's that sense of purpose that, you know, when it comes to it, the best results are when people work together. So I'll leave you with that. Just for that question. I'll come back later, no doubt.
I think as well, the clarity helped people work together, because people from different parts of the community, like you say, the business community, the voluntary sector, there was a very clear mandate of whatever happens, we've just got to keep people safe. And so that was a uniting purpose, I think, which is a whole other theme of conversation around what we need to do differently with change.
I agree. I agree that moral sense of purpose is what bound us together. I agree. And if you think about John Cotter and his 8-step change model, the vision is right up there at the top.
Yeah.
Getting the vision sorted and building a guiding coalition is what people just did during the pandemic, because number one, I don't think we had to. Number two, there was a tremendous will to do that and to work that way.
And I think as well, what was uniting about the pandemic, although it did affect everybody in different ways, it did affect everybody. So it was something that was very real for everybody. So, you know, everybody had some impact, whether it was that family members, they were concerned about their own health, they were concerned about their job, their income, what, you know, their business, whatever it was, it did impact everybody in some way. Which I think probably makes it relatable, doesn't it? And that's, again, something that we need to reflect on going forward, because I do think when we do big change programs, we often only present the purpose from the organisational perspective, and we don't necessarily make it relatable to individual people why they should care about this change that's happening. Which does bring me to one of the things that we do quite a lot is, and we try and keep it very simple. So we do try and keep sort of management consultancy speech out of our work as much as possible. But we run workshops around what will be different. And that's a core question for us. And I know there's some people on the call who have taken part in some of these. I can see there's some client names on our call, so who have been through the process. And we will ask that question over and over again at the start of a change project or program. And we'll ask that question from different perspectives. So we'll say, okay, well, what will be different for staff? What will be different for residents? What will be different for members? What will be different for leaders? To really get the project to a place where it's looking at the outcome rather than the process. And I was just interested, Teresa, with your background in change and transformation, we have quite similar backgrounds. How do you manage to keep change from being less about a process of project management and more about what is actually going to be different here?
Oh wow, that is the $1 million question. It is different in different local authorities, because you have to adapt that to how the organisation is. But for me, I think it's consistency of the message, of communication, of saying to different. I think what I've realised is that culture plays a big role in this. And it's the culture and the subculture of each of the services, and the way, and it's how can I put it? I don't want to say the word weird, but it's weird how some members of staff get it very quickly, or in particular service areas. You can have the workshops and you can say to them, you know, you can have that discussion about this is what the change is, and you can keep the message consistent, and they can see what you're trying to deliver, and you can celebrate the milestone and celebrate the successes, because I think that's one way of bringing staff along with you, because sometimes they could just be like, oh, this has been going on for about 6 months. We've seen nothing. What's happening? So when you hit that milestone, and when there's been a sort of a change, or you've achieved something, I think it's really important to actually communicate that, to say, remember what we said, we've done this, this is where we are with it, and this is what we've achieved, and this is what that difference has made to what it used to be before. And what's interesting is, depending on the service, depending on the culture of within that service, there are some staff will get it, but there are some other services where you have to maybe do it differently. You just have to adapt your style. One thing I've learned is that just doing the workshops and communicating does not necessarily mean that they get it, that staff get it. I had a recent experience of working with a service area that literally haven't been touched for decades. They've just been there for 20, 25 years. So all of the buzzwords that we know, all of the, oh yeah, we're making this change, we're doing that, it's alien to them. And they don't have the smartphones, they don't have the laptop for you to sort of write all the stuff to them about, you know, projects and program. This is what we're trying to do, and this is what we're trying to achieve. So the different way of communicating with them, getting them, you know, round and literally talking to them, and actually they have questions their questions are questions that, you know, they haven't spoken to anyone in years that, you know, about a change or a transformation. So their questions were a lot more basic than, say, a different service. And the change I was delivering was across both service areas. So my job was to bring the people in that service to the level of the people in the other service who are used to change. So, you know, you just have to do it differently. The comms was different, the approach was different, the delivery was different. But what happened during the pandemic was that because these guys in the other service, they're a lot more practical in the way that they do things. It's, you know, they just went out and did it. So they were able to, and I think we were pleasantly happy, not surprised, because we've done all that work. So we were hoping they'd get it, and they did. And during the pandemic, they were the ones that really came out and delivered for us. They were the ones that connected with the customers. They were the ones that were like, oh, now we get what you're saying. When it took maybe the pandemic to actually bring the best out in them as well. So for me, I can't, in terms of clarity, I think, yes, the message has to be consistent. Yes, I think a transformation and change person has to be at the top table because of the interdependencies and because of the way that some of the what you're trying to deliver would impact in various areas. So I think that you know, if you're, the danger of not being at the table with the decision makers or being represented at the table with the decision makers is that when things change at the top, if the transformation and program don't know about it, it can skew the whole clarity, the whole vision, the whole everything, and you're going off in a tangent and the leadership is going off somewhere else. So for me, you know, we have to wrap it up, the culture, sitting at the top table, making sure that the message is consistent, understanding the services that you're trying to deliver the change to. Do they get your style of comms? Do they actually get the clarity that you're trying to actually put across to them? Do they know what will change for them? And does it differ from the changes in other service areas? So it's a whole continuous program and process, and actually ticking the box all the time. Every time we've achieved something, we go back and say, look, that's been done. How's that affected you? We're like 20, 30% done. This is what we're going to do next. And this is how that's going to affect you. And this is how that's going to change the way you work. And also keep the trade union informed, because a lot of staff prefer sometimes to talk to the trade union about, oh, you know, this change, how it's affecting me. We need to get them on board. We need to make sure that they're communicating the same message that we're communicating to the staff as well, so that we're speaking with the same voice. They're not hearing something different elsewhere. So it's just a continuous piece of work. It just never stops. It's all I can say to that.
And I do just see David commenting, saying the importance of that coalition, and the top table can sometimes be uncomfortable with the amount that it's so crucial to involve employees to be participants in the change programme, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. And again, that was something that I think the pandemic provided, because there wasn't, you know, there was more authenticity, I think, because leaders didn't know necessarily what to do. This was a new situation, so it did enable people to open up a little bit more and invite people into, okay, well, we've got this massive problem here, let's all work together to fix it, rather than a more traditional top-down approach.
And the other thing I was going to add to that is, in terms of collaboration, what the pandemic also did was, there's a danger that being a trading company, we can sort of like go off and think about what we're trying to do and so forth. But we also had a table, a spot at the table with, you know, with the council, the pandemic table, so to speak. So we were able to work more in collaboration with the local authority in terms of delivering the services together and making sure, because after all, their residents, we're serving the same residents. So we just have to make sure that we're aligned with some of their priorities as well, to make sure we deliver this as one, and it's not a sort of separate 2 tiers sort of service going on. So that brought it out, and we were able to sort of like work more in collaboration with partners and the council and everything else.
Thank you. And we do have a question from Helen asking Teresa, were the two different teams that you mentioned, you know, where one was more used to change than the other, were they different in terms of age profile?
Yes and no. Yes, well, yes and no, actually, because the team that were more used to change were they had a more, should I say, churn. So there's an apprenticeship scheme there, so there were younger people coming in, but the other service area was a bit more static, so to speak. So it was a bit more mixed with the other service that was used to change, and the other one was a bit more, you know, static, just being the same.
Thank you. And so Hannah, one of the reasons why we think that what will be different process is so powerful is because we think it really helps to build better comms. And one of the things that I have seen previous to the pandemic is organizations set up a big change program and then they dedicate some comms to it, but they communicate things that people don't really care about. So it's often coming from a very project and program management perspective. So they talk about things like milestones and timelines, and they don't actually talk about what is going to be different for the people that they're communicating with. So that's partly why we use that process. I just wondered what's your reflection on how has communication change? Did you have to get very clever about what your audiences were and what they would care about, rather than necessarily just communicating what leaders wanted to say?
Yeah, and I think the pandemic as well has given that freedom for officers like myself to do that as well. It's empowered us as individuals and as experts in our field to go ahead and lead that. You know, Ian and Teresa have both touched on clear and consistent messaging being really, really powerful, having partners on board. You know, what we've done is try and voice these messages from various partners, measure the impacts and the effects of that. Having members on board has been key as well. For example, early on in the pandemic, we produced a range of assets to tell people to wear masks in shops. We stuck the council logo on them all, made them into different languages. And then we realised actually we aren't the right people to be voicing this message. So we spoke to our community organisations, our hub, and we said, can we put your logo on this and put it in shops instead? And that partnership working meant not only did we have the messages that we needed out there, they weren't all council voiced, they were voiced by the people. And internally, we've tried to take that approach to since as well. So when you're talking about climate change and other things, yes, there are decisions from the strategic leadership, but also what are the individuals doing? What are their thoughts? And to get that buy-in, we really need to think, who should this be voiced by? If it's something for the people, are we voicing it from the chief exec? Are we voicing it from a member? Or are we voicing it from the people that have been involved? Are we voicing it from an external consultant who is the expert in this field and is advising us? And they're the kind of conversations that have been raised through the pandemic, through all the partnership working. And I think long term, that continuing is just fantastic for communications and having those kind of choices as well. And I know I said, you know, consistent, powerful messaging is really, really important. However, in my experience over this pandemic, it's led to a bit of passiveness and detachment from the messaging as well. When we keep saying the same thing very clearly over and over again, it works. But when you replicate that for 50 different messages, it becomes that you are bombarded in such a digital world where we're flicking and scrolling. Yes, clear, concise and direct is important, but we do need to think of those new ways to get through to people as well. It goes much deeper, I guess. And it's about the timing, the delivery, the voice, new ways we can do it. And to gain that focus, it's not always a linear action. So for example, it's December now. So this time last year, the vaccination rollout was just starting. We had very strong clarity of what we needed to do. We needed to have as much uptake of that vaccination as possible. There were surveys done and polls done on a regional level, on a national level, to work out why people may be hesitant. That information was all given to us as a local authority. So on paper, you have all the tools to do this job. In practice, even though our demographic is similar to other areas, the people aren't the same. They have different concerns, there's different conversations. So what we did Again, talking about how officers were empowered at the height of this, we decided to go a bit rogue. We went into one of our community chat groups, which is a very active group. We went in as the council and we created a poll and we asked people, will you get the vaccine, yes or no? And if not, why not? Comment, let's have a conversation. That is something that is just unheard of, doing and putting yourself out there like that in such a large, busy and vocal group. It went exceptionally well. We got over 2,000 responses. We got hundreds of comments, all with really important information that we weren't aware of the reasons for hesitancy. We then used that information to compile some FAQs, and that kind of created the focus. So I guess what I'm going back to is we had clarity on what we needed to do and why, but we didn't have that focus on a really local, boots on the ground level. And these one-to-one conversations with individuals are so important, and then being able to speak about that after was really powerful as well. We didn't just release some FAQs. We said 2,000 people took part. We've listened, we've learned, we've spoke to NHS, we've spoke to our community groups, and this is the kind of product of it. And I know this is a lot smaller than a large change project throughout an organisation. However, the learning from that and the power that gave us to steer our resources, to steer our funding, to steer our day-to-day activity was really good learning for us, and that's something we've continued. And I can't believe that was a year ago and we're still in the pandemic.
I remember at the start when we all thought it was just going to be a couple of weeks. Do you remember when we first went into lockdown and it was like, it'll be 2 weeks, we'll be fine. Ian, have you seen a difference in how your organisation has communicated with your communities during the pandemic?
Very much so. Hannah's right. It's about how and the various modes that you use as well. And it's just like, there's lots of research around first line managers being more trusting than senior leaders. The fact that there are organizations, there are those trusted professions, there are those trusted brands. The NHS is a classic example, our police another. And we found that, and this is the right thing to do, working with different partners enabled us to deliver key messages in a more effective way. And that's something that we're going to continue. I'd say the other thing, and it links to what I think David put it in the chat, there's some great chat as well, colleagues, for you to read through. Great conversations there. Was about staff. I mean, I know that Teresa mentioned about the impact on people and staff, and rather than the sort of top-down approach, how effective the bottom-up approach can be. And we have values in our organisation that are called the STARS values: supporting each other, being transparent, appreciating each other, and being respectful. And our staff came up with them. So 700 of our staff came up with the STARS values, and in doing so, there's a great sense of ownership, and they live by them. And this is what we try to espouse every single day. And it's not perfect. There's no perfect organisation, but that's what we try to live by, and that is something that we're seeing is shifting the culture in our organisation. Going back to Teresa's point there. When we did the staff surveys, we had regular pulse surveys. One's just gone live now, actually, another one, but we found that over 90% of our staff felt that we were communicating with them effectively. 75% felt that they were well supported by their managers. Of course, the flip side of that is 25% weren't, so then that helps you drill down. But it's ensuring that you get I'll use another metaphor here and another bit of a change theory, that balance between the balcony and the dance floor. So the metaphor, the Heifetz adaptive leadership metaphor, is about how as a leader you toggle between the balcony, where you can see everything and you are horizon scanning, and actually getting down on the dance floor. The problem is that if you spend too much time on the dance floor, you lose the vision, because you can just see what's around you, but at least you understand what's happening on the ground, and that's really, really important. So your question about how we communicate with our staff and with our partners, it's about getting that right, you know, the balance between the balcony and the dance floor, seeing services on the ground, talking to frontline workers as much as we can, using different modes of communications now that are available to us and are more acceptable. We stream to hundreds of staff, and recognizing that in any change, going back to that change curve, you know, from a human psychological perspective, we're all going to adapt at different times and at different paces. So in managing change, the way we communicate and engage will be critical to all of that. You know, and there'll always be innovators and early adopters and the early majorities, and actually there'll always be laggards, won't there? So recognizing that when you are designing a change program, the importance of not just communication and stakeholder management, but engagement and meaningful engagement are things that we should hold dear.
Yeah.
Definitely, and congratulations on 90% of your staff feel they were communicated with effectively. That's a massive, massive thing. And I've always joked that every organisation I've worked in, staff say, no, people don't communicate with us enough.
It's credit to a great comms team that I have. It's nothing to do with me. You know, I am fortunate to have loads of brilliant people and people smarter than me working in my organisation, and they've done a fantastic job.
Teresa, do you have any reflections on comms in change programs?
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, all I think it's useful what Anna and Ian are saying. You just have to have the sort of backing behind you, because what I've experienced is I think it's true that sometimes staff do think that the change and transformation program communicating buzzwords, milestones and processes and this and the other, and they don't actually, we're not talking to them in a language. So I think that, you know, with the communications, it's really very important to speak in the language that staff understand, and to ensure that I think a lot of it is sometimes we tend to sort of talk to staff about things. We talk to people about service areas. This is what we're trying to do. This is what the vision is, and so forth. And we encourage feedback from them and say, well, tell us what you think. And I think, you know, we fail sometimes to act on the feedback, on the concerns or some of the questions. Yes, they come back with questions and they come back with feedback, and I think that is very important to respond to every single, you know, questions and concerns and feedback that people have when you're delivering a change program. And also, I think it's also important to, because it can be something that other people have asked and we've repeated so many times, so it's important to keep repeating it. And I also think that a critical thing for me, I think, is also to keep testing the temperature of the senior leaders to make sure that their priorities haven't changed, the politics hasn't changed, your program is still relevant, and is as important then as it was when it was commissioned, and whether the external environment, or i.e. the pandemic, has reduced their appetite for risks. Perhaps they were more willing to take that risk before the pandemic and, oh, do this transformation, and then the pandemic hits and there's all these other issues and all these other priorities, and suddenly they don't have that appetite that they had earlier on for the depth of the change that they commissioned in the first place. So I think that communication is not just to the service, but also to the top team, you know, are we still on course? Do you still want this delivered? What are the risks? Let's look at the risks again. Let's look at the interdependencies again, because if it's very important to have that continuous backing from the top. And it's also good. I know that the members are aware, you know, of the change in the vision, but I think there should be regular briefings to the members separately on the change and the transformation and what we're trying to deliver, so that everybody's on board and we don't get to a situation where there's cold feet somewhere and you're not aware of it, and then suddenly there are slight barriers that you lose the focus a bit, and once you start to lose the focus. Staff are very, very good at sensing those things. And then, you know, things starts to get a bit more, and I think that's where, for me, it's very, very important that the comms is both ways. Is yes, the staff and the top team, do you still have the appetite for this thing? Are you still willing to take the risk that you wanted to take pre the pandemic, or should we look at this again? Should we do it partially? Should we go, you know, that sort of comms is very, very important. And I think post-pandemic, I think changes that are still ongoing, that started pre the pandemic, I think you know, conversations should be had whether you know, there's still an appetite for that bigger change or whatever, or whether there's a change of direction. I think is quite not very helpful if everybody lets the change continue, knowing that that's not actually what we want now, that things have changed. So I think that the conversation just needs to carry on.
Thank you. And I can see we've got some great comments in the chat. So Anya talking about how important it is to have wide and diverse groups to address problems and not just kind of one-way communication. And also Ali talking about the importance of not saturating comms with buzzwords and keeping them honest and plain. Hannah, do you have any reflections on that and how you managed to keep things very clear and plain?
I like to think of myself as a champion for battling the buzzwords and advocating for plain English where possible. And I like to talk about, you know, the average reading age is 9 years old. That's external, internally. Who are we talking to? Are we by communicating in a convoluted and very clever way? Are we doing that for ourselves or for other people? And it makes me think of times at school when you think of complex equations and things. Do you understand it enough to explain it in a very, very simple way? And this is what I say to leaders who will bring something that we need to communicate, we need to get it out to colleagues. Can you summarise that for me in 5 bullet points? And if we can't do that, we maybe need to go back and revisit the purpose and what it is. If we truly, truly understand things, it should be simple to communicate. You know, in the height of the pandemic, we had this all shared purpose. Now we're in this bit of uncertain and limbo times. Answers aren't known, the understanding maybe isn't known, and that's where, you know, as Teresa said, let's get rid of the buzzwords. That's what we need. People need to know that we're being transparent, we're being clear, we're being honest, we're leading with integrity, with what we're saying. We're not trying to confuse anybody, and that, yeah, that's kind of my input. This is, if we understand it, everybody should be able to understand it, and that's kind of my role, to get that from leader to community, to colleagues. So yes, no buzzwords.
The other thing that I reflected on was the focus element, which one of the reasons I love working in local government is because of how massively wide and varied the remit is. There's not many other sectors where you would work in an organisation that employs roles as diverse as social workers, through to accountants and lawyers, through to people that work in parks, and it's just hugely varied what local government does. But that can make it challenging, I think, when you're trying to create clarity around the future, because there's so many different pockets of teams and so many different people with different drivers. And one of the things that the pandemic did enable local government to do was almost narrow its focus for a period of time. You know, they were able to, in some cases, pause some services and redirect resources, and that's not something that is normally available to the sector as an option. And I just wondered, Ian, I'll come to you first. What's your reflection on how having that clarity enabled you to have that focus, and what can we do about that going forward? Because we won't always have that as an option, will we, to be like, okay, let's just stop doing that for a while and concentrate on this.
So my initial response is that we didn't stop many things. No. That things did carry on in large part. We deliver around 800 services and in excess of 1,000 statutory responsibilities. And whilst you're right, Lucy, that we did redirect some staff and there was deployment and I think thank my teams. I'm on kind of thanks overdrive. I'm on a thanks offensive with my teams, because they did, some of them, a small number, did different things. So whilst we closed, say, libraries because we couldn't, open them, those staff were, as you say, deployed to other places like the volunteer hub, Kingston Stronger Together, which was brilliant work. But I have to say, the lion's share. So we had to, I'll give you an example, and we worked across London really well with London authorities, learning from each other, providing mutual aid, not just authorities but with key partners as well. But we had to fill out a return to send to the centre, as it were, every day, to which was measuring housing and housing response in the height of the pandemic, environmental health, of course public health, of course schools, because whilst we didn't have open access for education, children were still being educated, whether that was through remote learning or children with additional needs, some with vulnerabilities, some we might call valuable, our most valuable children were going into schools. So that continued. Social care, we still had to see our service users, child protection, kids needed that response as well. A lot of that shifted online. In the children's sense, they liked it, they preferred it. We know in this current era where, when my kids were, when they were teenagers, Lucy, my boy, he'd only speak to me if he texted me. He wouldn't have a normal conversation. I had to text him. So in this current era of things shifting around how we communicate, the kids subject to child protection actually enjoy the online and video calls part of it. So the synopsis for me is a lot just carried on. People carried on, and the bins were collected. You all live in places and you saw the bins collected. They were. And at a time when it was really scary for those refuse collectors to collect bins because they didn't have PPE at that time. A tremendous amount of respect for them. So just hold on to the fact that most things were still done. There was some deployment, but at the margins in the grand scheme.
Thank you. Have you got any lessons about, so whilst a lot of work was still going on, there was probably a change in focus of, how to make things continue and where to really put your attention as a leadership team. Did you find that changed and having focus on specific areas helped?
Yeah, so I'm a believer in sort of evaluating what works. So we commissioned an independent formative evaluation of our response to the pandemic with partners, and New Local carried that out, and it's been published so people can read it. And the reason why we did that is for that reason, Lucy, to identify what worked well from a strengths-based perspective. What is it that we introduced that was temporary and that we need to jettison, and what needs to continue? And the stuff that worked well, going back to the start of the debate, was around collaboration, a sense of purpose. And we had a number of recommendations come out of that, which was about a new vision for the borough, continuing with this sense of sort of this collaboration and the strength of partnerships, and more about the council as an organisation being more permissive, less paternalistic, because the elements of my organisation that it wants to do things for people rather than empower, and that came out of that evaluation. So we're going through that process now. I talk a lot about leading by letting go, and I also believe that many of the answers to some of our most intractable problems are in the very same communities that we serve. And my final point, going back to, I think Teresa mentioned about the people, looking after our people. This pandemic, and you mentioned it, Lucy, affects those who serve as well as those served, and therefore, as employers, we owe it to our people to look after them and provide as much support as we possibly can. Yeah,
I agree 100%. We actually did a similar evaluation for Hyndburn, which is how we've met Hannah, and very similar theme.
Sorry, I have to go.
Do you? Thanks for joining us.
Thanks to all of you for the learning as well from my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we did a similar evaluation, didn't we, Hannah, with Heimburn, and I think there were some very similar lessons that came out of that around kind of collaboration and partnership working. But I think I'm interested, Teresa, in your view as a person from change and transformation. I think that my personal perspective of that power of focus has been that perhaps going forward, when organisations are going through change programmes, sometimes it's very easy to kind of get on a place of wanting to do lots and lots of things, and actually being very focused about, no, we're going to change this thing and we're going to see it through is very powerful. What's your reflections on that?
Well, I agree. I think that it's when the pandemic hit, I think we were forced really to do a complete reevaluation of all the changes that we were delivering, and we had to prioritize. Really, we had to determine what to put on hold and what to deliver. And echoing what Ian just said, we had one of the service areas that we had was repairs and maintenance. And during the pandemic, the decision was made to just focus on urgent repairs because of the transmitting the virus, just going into households and doing repairs was a no-no. It was just the urgent ones, the ones that mattered. And on the school side, we had what the innovation was. What happened was we had staff deciding, and with senior leadership also, that we were going to deliver food parcels. And I think that to vulnerable families, and what started as a small idea became huge. And so we used the vans of the operatives that are not working in terms of, with the repairs and maintenance, to deliver the food parcels to families within the community that were vulnerable. And there were, I think we delivered about 3,000 food parcels during that time. So the humanity sort of trumped really a lot of the part of what we were trying to do. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that in terms of the change program, we had to, the focus shifted a bit from, the systems and delivering particular processes to actually, we think this is much more urgent. This is more important. This is priority. Let's do this. And the focus shifted. And what was actually very useful for me was the fact that the staff got it. They got it. The focus went. They just thought, yes, we have to do this. Oh my God, my doorbell's going. Can I just pause and get my door, please? Is that okay? Sorry.
So Hannah, did you find that having focus in comms helped?
Yes, so as Teresa was saying, that collaborative working and the pooling of resources, as a local authority, we had people working help in the contact centre that wasn't their day job, and everybody kind of pitched in. But that collaborative working not only meant we could offer a holistic approach to residents. So, for example, the combining of all our community organisations and our food banks under one umbrella of the Heimburn Hub, where people would contact the council directly and then I say would in the past tense, it's still ongoing now. We've still got that out there. That meant, as a communications professional, we were communicating one message of support, one message of help to our community. They come to this place that is politically neutral. We're a trusted local authority, but yet they can access all the support across the borough. Having that coordinated response and that partnership working not only meant my job was so much easier. I'm sharing one phone number, one email address. It meant people could be referred for things that they didn't know they needed to be referred for, and that's something really wonderful that's come out of the pandemic that partnership working, and we still meet now. We have something called the Community Action Network group. There's over 50 organisations part of it, which is huge. We're such a small local authority with 80,000 residents. We meet monthly, we discuss hot topics, we give a COVID update, and that holistic care for the borough exists because of that partnership working. And for me, any kind of change programs need that really at the core of how we work. As a council, we have so many different departments, and that collaborative working across departments is continuing through the pandemic as well. Reaching out externally for that too has just been wonderful to be part of, really. And it gives us a focus that's overall. And if we can't help personally, we instantly know somebody who can. So yeah.
Yeah, I think for me it was just there is a lot of power in focus, and it's a really difficult thing to do in local government because of how varied the work is. But focusing on something and tackling a specific issue, I think, has a massive amount of power. We've got a comment from Peter saying there is a risk of using clarity to dumb down a complex message or a sensitive issue, and effective and efficient is one message often used, but undefined. We should not underestimate the knowledge and understanding of all colleagues, and I think that's absolutely true. I think that what clarity does bring, though, is a sense of courage sometimes. So I think when there is a lack of clarity, what people feel like is because they're not clear where we're trying to get to, they're not clear what will be different, it actually makes people not empowered to act. And that was something that we saw a massive spike in the pandemic in our research, was people being courageous to take risks, to take action, and to do things. So as in your example, Teresa, we know that certain families will need a food parcel, so let's just make that happen. Having that clarity did enable action. And sometimes I think a lot of big complex change programs are led from the organization's perspective, not the people's perspective, whether that's people in the workforce or whether it's people in the community. It's very much from the organizational perspective, and doesn't always have that clarity of this is actually what we're trying to change here. And I think I saw a massive increase in people just understanding what needed to change and taking action to make it happen, rather than feeling unsure. I don't know if that resonates at all with you, Teresa.
Yes, I think you're completely right. I think what the pandemic did was it made people, it broke things down to a more granular level. People were like, what does this mean for me and what can I do? As opposed to pre the pandemic, where there was that clarity, with communication, this is what we're trying to deliver, this is how it's going to change things. And then with the pandemic, it kind of broke it down more to what can I do for the customer? What can I do for people? And that's where the ideas came from. So pre-pandemic, yes, free school meals, everybody was, we were focused on, how many, what percentage of children are entitled to free school meals? What can we do? How can we make the food more nutritious? The usual stuff. Pandemic hit and it was, they're not actually going to get it. What are we going to do? And there are more vulnerable families out there. How are we going to get the food to them? So it was more rounded in terms of not only do we have to make the food parcels, but how do we get it delivered to them? So people started thinking more about what does this mean for me? And for us, it actually hits what we were trying to achieve, because it was the social purpose, it was the community stuff, it was getting people together, and with these new thinking from staff saying, okay, how do we get these parcels delivered? Can we speak to the operatives that are not using their vans? Can we sort of from a trading company perspective talk to colleagues in the council to see how we can work with the housing options team, which is the homeless team, to see how we can actually reach these vulnerable families and deliver the parcel? So it actually got them thinking out of the box, and it's really, and I think that it clarified also the focus for them. So this is what it means for me, and this is what I can do. So it just pushed them a bit more to actually think better. And I think it's probably because we weren't doing all that comms thing weekly. Oh, this, we we let them think it through themselves, and they came up with fantastic, solutions for it. They were literally driving it. The enthusiasm was there, the passion was there. They were coming in, they were doing it. We had a whole massive, and I think I took pictures of it, of a whole massive warehouse full of, food parcels that were going out on a daily basis to families. It was really amazing, and we hooked up with charities, voluntary sectors. It was really, and that was not initially part of the plan, but that was alluding to what Lucy was saying earlier. That just made staff think more, and actually aligns with the focus. It aligned with what we were trying to deliver. They just sort of like have had a more sort of innovative way of thinking about it and actually delivering it. So it all worked out in the end. So yeah, I completely agree with you.
Thank you. Hannah, do you have any reflections on what you think how you think that clarity impacted courage?
Yeah, and I was just having a look at the chat. Clarity does bring courage, but as Peter's highlighted, there needs to be that understanding there and allowing people to be part of that wider picture. So as I said previously, I'm a bit of a broken record. I always say, can you explain in 5 bullet points what is meant? We can easily put out a statement, doing this will be effective. Can you tell me 5 ways? Let's evidence our statements. Let's keep people in with the broader understanding. So as much as, say plain language, no buzzwords, also that doesn't mean making the information we give people very small. Let's keep it broad. And I think that's how people, colleagues, community buy in and go along for the ride as well, because they're part of it, and they can delve as much or as little as they want into the information, as much as they're comfortable with. So yeah, that's kind of my reflection on that. Clarity brings courage, but the courage isn't there without the understanding. Essentially.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And I think for me, I know we touched on earlier that the tension between, there was like a sense of command and control, but also there was a sense of great co-production in what the solution was. And I think that, and I've spoken with we've got customers on the call, we've had this conversation with, my personal view is that you need that command and control over what the future is going to be, but then you need that co-production, that co-design on how we get there. And I think that's how you get the best outcome for change, because people, once they have that clarity of actually, no, I understand where we're going, then have something constructive to engage with. And it is the people on the ground who know how to get there better than the leaders. And so it's so important to involve people in that process. And from a change management perspective, what that does is it allows people to get ready for that process, to prepare for it, so that my background is project management, and I have a lot of time for project management, as I know you will too, Teresa. It brings a great amount of structure, but it often skips that step of the people side of it. And I think what the pandemic did was it brought those two together. It brought structure and rigor and discipline about what needed to happen. But I have to say, I think it came more from emergency planning discipline than necessarily project management discipline. But it brought that structure around it, but also because of the fact that nobody really knew what to do, there was this then, right, let's all just get our heads around the table. And I think if we can, going forward, lead change, organisational change, more from that kind of place than how we've done it in the past, I think that we'll have much better outcomes. But I'm interested to hear others' views on that, because we're making it up at the moment, aren't we? We're figuring it out as we go.
Yeah, I think the driver for much of what we did came from staff. It's not so much engagement, it's not the word, it's the enthusiasm and the passion and the willingness to actually sort of like do these things. It's something and I'm not hand on heart, I don't know exactly what we did that brought that out, but it wasn't, there was a marked difference between how the change and transformation was going pre the pandemic, which was chugging along the way it should be, and then during the pandemic, it just ramped up with how people started behaving. It was, there was so much passion, there was so much invested in the outcomes, and so much enthusiasm. Is going forward, Lucy, I don't know how we can bottle that up. because I think that really drove a lot of the outcomes that we had during the pandemic. And I think that I might have mentioned this before, is my slight worry is that everybody will just go back into the box, into their little boxes after all of these. And we wouldn't see that passion anymore, and we wouldn't see that enthusiasm anymore. And I don't know the answer, but if we can bottle that up, then yeah, we're on our way. But I don't know. I think we should just keep having that discussion and see what happens.
Hannah, do you think that your organisation will do change differently going forward as a result of all your lessons learned during the pandemic?
I do, yeah. I think so much good has come from it that we can measure, and that we're already continuing now. I know we are still in the pandemic, but we're not in that intense crisis mode anymore. And there is still drive and ambition to keep that empowerment for officers, to keep that partnership working. You know, pre-pandemic, a job role like mine, your steer is from central government, county council, and your leadership team. During the pandemic, that steer came from all those places, but it equally came from the other places like colleagues, and the charitable organisations that we work with and things like that. And everybody became more of an equal stakeholder. And that approach has been really, really powerful. It's meant harmonious messaging that we as council can be at the centre of. And it's also allowed us to understand that as a local authority, we're maybe not always the best place people or organisation to deliver that message, be it internally or externally. And I think that's something we are already continuing. We've recently just distributed a magazine across the borough, funded through our Community Champions funding, awarded by central government. That magazine is full of community stories, charitable organisations, the work that they're doing. So rather than an advert for the council saying this is everything we can do for you and we can help you with, it's been voiced by the people that are doing that work. And that's the kind of thing that will definitely continue. It's been so well received, and yeah, I do think we will not be going back to the way we were before, but I don't have the answer to where we will be in a year.
No, I don't think anyone does. And our research has, we've managed to draw out 6 themes, which today's theme has been very much around clarity. But the other themes are purpose, which we have touched on, human, which again we've touched on, very much that just acceptance of humanity I saw, which I wouldn't necessarily have seen as much of prior to the pandemic, even though I do think local government is a particularly human focused sector. Collaboration, which we've touched on, there was a massive spike in collaboration between organisations, and that's something that I know local government has always worked closely with partners, but I really do think that increased massively during the pandemic. Taking action, which we've talked again about, because that very much links with clarity, I think, where people just focused on action and taking steps to make things happen, whereas before we might have focused a bit more on things like governance and planning. People just got stuff done, which was really exciting and refreshing to see. And also a sense of perseverance, which and a sense of resilience. So I have seen in the past organisations kind of start a bit of a change programme and then kind of lose its way, and that wasn't really an option. So I think there's a whole host of lessons to be learned there around when it's not an option to just change your mind because it gets a bit sticky and difficult, then what magic can happen. But they were certainly our reflections, and we have now designed a process by which we can look at an organisation through that lens and say, okay, well, if you were going to do change in a post-pandemic world, how could you take those lessons and implement them and do change differently going forward? Because the thing that I'm very passionate about, and I know you are as well, Teresa, is that we really can't go back to how it was before. You know, you think that all of these staff and I've had people say things to me like, I'm finally, after 30 years, doing what I came to local government to do, which is actually helping people. And you just think, how did we let somebody like that lose their way and kind of get bogged down in process? And I think people really stepped up and really wanted to support their communities, keep people safe and well, and really moved you know, hell and high water to enable them and their colleagues to do that. We can't go back now to a world where, oh, well, we might change something, but it's going to take us 3 years to do it. I don't know, do you want to add to that, Teresa? Because I know this is something you're as equally passionate about as I am.
Yes, a couple of things before Lucy. I'm just looking at the chat, and I agree with DH about enthusiasm, his take on the enthusiasm from staff that has been bottled up. I agree with that. And then to come to PW's Peter Whitehouse, to his point about continuous improvement. I think going forward, the lessons learned, I suppose, is not just a post-pandemic lesson, is ensuring that when we make this change and transformation, that the business is ready to accept, you know, the improvement that has been made. Because yes, PW made a very good point about continuous improvement. There has been situations where, and Lucy, you'd have had this as well, where with huge transformation, change and everything, and then we leave, and then it falls back almost to how it used to be, because in some cases, because there isn't that resilience within operations to carry on, or whether the continuous improvement framework, you know, wasn't adhered to or working. So I think going forward, post-pandemic, it's not a pandemic problem, but I do think that it's a good point about ensuring that we know when we deliver a change and a transformation, that the continuous improvement is there and it carries on. Post-pandemic, I think collaborative working is a big thing. Is a big lessons learned for me, is that we were able to move quicker and do things better, because of the collaboration and the partnership working, and actually the realization that we don't know everything actually, you know, and the solutions that we might have in place for something might not actually be the best solution, and somebody else actually has a better solution than you, or somebody that has a bit more expertise in that, you know, knows a bit more than you. So I think looking, for me, designing a change going forward, I think I will definitely reach out more outside of my box, so to speak. And I'm not just talking about staff or leaders or anything, but look other areas within, say, the council or within the organization that you're working at, because you might not always have the answers. It's very normal for us to map out the change, to do the proposal, to say this is what what it should look like and so forth. But I think now that I've seen how brilliant, you know, others have delivered some other aspects of what we were trying to do, I think I'll reach out a lot more and be a bit more inclusive when drawing up a change or transformation plan. And actually, and you know what would be great, Lucy? The accountability to lie with that delivery as well, so that, you know, you devolve that accountability is not always at the center, not always with the change program. So if they can do something better, if you can do that collaboration and they can do it better, let them be accountable for it and let them deliver it, because I think that also focuses the mind. When the accountability lies with you, it gives you a bit of clarity and you know what you have to deliver. So I think those are all the things that work well during the pandemic, that we can actually pull into a change program plan proposal going forward would be very useful. And I think partnership, working and collaboration is one of it, and some way of harnessing the enthusiasm of staff. I think my old CEO is in the group now, and he's just sent me a text to say, yeah, people pull together in times of crisis. I know going forward, there's not always going to be a crisis situation to bring out the enthusiasm and the passion in people, but we have to find a way to bring it out then, if there isn't a crisis, and try and deliver it. We just have to find a way. Perhaps speak to those staff. What triggered it for you? So, you know. So, yeah.
Thank you. Hannah, any final thoughts from you?
Obviously, that's not my kind of area of expertise, but one thing that I've kind of picked up on throughout, Lucy, right at the very beginning of this chat, you mentioned, you know, everybody had to work from home by a certain deadline, and there was that going on. So picking up what Peter said in the chat about every 5 years organisations doing new change programmes, although it's not a pandemic problem, as Teresa has said, it's a little bit different this time round, because we've kind of was forced into the change, and now we're backtracking and we're analysing which bits worked, which bits didn't. You know, historically, organisations going through change, it would happen gradually. They'd come in, they'd analyse, they'd assess, whereas we're doing that kind of backwards work. And so I feel hopeful. My enthusiasm is bottled in my drawer here. And I feel that this is a bit different than maybe 5 years ago and 10 years ago, where change programs would come in, because we've got that almost a model of working that we have to do that we can reflect on. So yeah, that's my final enthusiastic bottle of feedback.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Teresa, as well. And obviously, I know Ian's had to leave, but a huge thanks to Ian if he does listen back to the recording. It's been really insightful to hear all three of you different perspectives on what happened during the pandemic and what we can do going forward to do change better. I think that's what I just feel really passionate about. Let's find a way to do change better, because there's been so much brilliant learning. And of course, thanks everybody that has taken part in the conversation, that has been listening in, those people that commented in the chat. Again, it's really lovely to hear different perspectives. We're all on this journey, I think, together of learning what we can take from this, and how we can go and do things differently in our own organisation. We do run these sessions fairly frequently, and the next session is in January, and Charlotte in my team will post the link into the chat now. It's on the 21st of January. That one is going to be around the human impact of change, so very much carrying on from the conversation we've had today. So what did we do differently that made us make more space for the human side of change during the pandemic that we perhaps didn't do prior to the pandemic? So lots and lots of brilliant learning there, and we'll have some more great speakers for you at that event. Do keep an eye out for us. We are actually launching a new website in the next 2 to 3 weeks, which has got a lot of resource on around our research that we've done in this area. We've written a new white paper. We do have a white paper on our current website already, but we've done a more up-to-date one, and some more information about the new methodology that we've designed that enables us to bring this new way of doing change into organisations. So do keep an eye out for that. And if you would like to be involved in any of these in the future, if you know anybody that would be a good speaker, then do get in touch with me or one of my team. And yeah, let's keep the conversation going. Let's keep learning.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank
you, Lucy.
Lucy, it's been very interesting. Thank you all. Nice
Thanks
meeting
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.